Welcome to Don't Buy the Bull, a podcast dedicated to unmasking the truth behind how so-called trusted Wall Street institutions and the American government really work. I'm your host, Cassandra Toroian. You can call me Cass. I'm a seasoned former equity analyst, investment manager, and former Wall Street Journal all-star analyst. And I'm passionate about helping people think for themselves by teaching them about things like investing, which may not be their forte. My only goal is to help you figure out how to use your own discernment and instinct to make good investment decisions for yourself. I have no skin in the game. And to do what I'd like to help you do, we have to look at the world around us, since the stock market does not operate in the bubble. So let's dive in. Wow, it's great to see everybody. This is Cassandra Toroian, Don't Buy the Bull. And I'm really excited about our guest today. This is Dan Cotter. And Dan is, by day, a corporate business attorney in Chicago. By night, he is a Supreme Court junkie and has actually written a book about the Supreme Court, which is right up my alley. And he also has his own podcast for the last couple of years, which is called Podium and Panel. So interesting stuff there for those geeks out there, like history and a little bit of the government sagas from the past. So it's great to have you today. I really appreciate you being on. I've been looking forward to talking with you, Dan.
Well, thank you, Cassandra, and I'm pleased to be here. And I love the title of your podcast. And I used to tell my kids K-A-N-B, kick, butt, no bull. And
right. Yeah.
I actually formed an LLC at one point, but never used it. I got rid of it. But so I'm a big fan of no bull.
Yeah. Well, there's so many ways in which that can be taken nowadays, too. It seems the bull is all around us in one form or the other. So it just happened that I had written a book called Don't Buy the Bull years ago. And when thinking about doing this podcast, I just couldn't come up with anything better than that because it was so appropriate. So we hope to call out certain things, as we see them, call it as we see it, and just raise awareness. Really, the point of having you on is to give people an opportunity to maybe learn something today about, some areas of law or the Supreme Court or cybersecurity that they just don't know anything about, right? And they're not probably going to get it from watching the local news. So why don't you start with telling us a little bit about your interest in the Supreme Court, and then we can go into some more current event details there.
Sure. So my interest in the Supreme Court started when I went to law school. And, I hadn't really paid attention to it before that. Loved constitutional law. And one of the things that my in-laws started buying me and I started buying is biographies and books about the Supreme Court, and was very interested. And as I think I told you in preparation for this show, Cassandra, the thing that, curious learners and other people, I think that kind of go through any subject matter in college and law school and grad school, is that we get pieces, we never get stuff in context of what's going on. We don't learn about what's behind what we're reading. And so I started thinking about that in law school, didn't have time at the time. And my collection grew. I have probably 300 to 500 books about the Supreme Court on my bookshelves at home.
Wow.
An entire 6 to 8 feet tall section of our bookshelves at home. In the basement, I've got all kinds of books about the Constitution, including the ratification. There's a Wisconsin Historical Society, for some unknown reason, has done a by-state of all the notes and all the convenings.
Wow.
And so I don't have all those books. They're very expensive, but I have probably half the set, and we'll eventually, hopefully, get the whole set, although my wife will probably kill me on that. So I started having this interest, and then jump ahead. I was teaching in 2010ish, I think it was, and I proposed a class, Supreme Court judicial biography, and my thought was that there were 17 chief justices. We would over the 14 weeks kind of cover them in one a week, the first three
Mhm.
in the first class, and in academia that didn't have enough grit, or so the person that
Mhm.
sponsored said, "Nah, you got to do this other thing." And so in the back of my mind, I said, eventually I want to write about this and kind of
Mhm.
think about it. That's what led to the book. And
Mhm. What's the
be,
name of the book?
the chief justices,
The
uh,
Chief Justices. Is it on
that's
Amazon?
it is, it is,
Okay.
and that's the short title, and then it has a colon, and the
Right,
17
right, right,
men,
right, right, right.
their times and decisions, and
So
so
who?
that was really it. But I also write a column for the Chicago Daily Law Bulletin, Cotter's Corner. It started out monthly, then biweekly, and now it's weekly. And I've written about the Constitution, the history of the United States, and about the Supreme Court pretty extensively over the last 14 years or so.
Mhm. So out of those 17 justices, which one is your favorite?
That's a good question, and I rank them in the book, and which is a difficult exercise. But if I had to pick a couple, my top three, I think, in the book were Chief Justice John Marshall, who was the fourth Chief Justice of the United States. His cases really set the tone for kind of constitutional law, from Dartmouth, which had to do with a corporate body and how they act, to McCullough and Marbury versus Madison, that said the
Mhm.
Supreme Court could rule.
Mhm.
Um, Chief Justice Warren, because of his, when you look at his Roe v. Wade, not Roe v. Wade, Brown versus Board of Education,
Yeah.
the way that he got that to be a unanimous decision and flipped it from being an affirmance of Plessy, probably, is pretty interesting. Just his kind of leadership,
Management style,
right?
yeah.
And not the
Mhm.
most academic guy. He would
Mhm.
admit he was like a C student at Berkeley, but he was a very popular governor and attorney general out in California. In fact, he was the nominee at one point of both the Republicans and the Democrats and the Independents out in California when he ran for governor.
Wow.
And then the third one would be Charles Evans Hughes, and uh, and the reason for that is he managed a lot of the New Deal and a lot of just dealing with the court that was referred to as by one of the justices then as nine scorpions in a bottle. There
Wow.
a lot of infighting and stuff, and he was able to
Okay.
manage kind of over
Uh,
just by his kind of leadership,
mhm.
was able to get that court to behave.
So fast forward now, we've had a lot of new folks added in the last 10 years. Depending on what your views are, that could be they could have been good picks or bad picks. But there seems to be a lot. This is a very active court, right? So we were talking earlier about some of the big decisions we're waiting for. One of which is on could overturn the Chevron doctrine. Can you talk a little bit about that and about the
Sure.
case?
So the Chevron doctrine is that when Congress enacts legislation and for executive agencies, which there's a lot of, right, the administrative state has grown over the decades, um, and their uh, interpretations of their authority is not is not creating ambiguity with respect to their mandates. Then the Chevron doctrine says we defer to that kind of the agency, and the cases that have come up. Chevron was an EPA case, an Environmental Protection Act, Clean
Mhm.
Water Act. The court has last term the court looked at a case and kind of punted or decided not to really full bore
Mhm.
address the Chevron doctrine. It's been around since 1984. It was a decision that there's a lot of stuff coming out about how the decision's made with the papers of Sandra Day O'Connor and Justice Stevens.
Mhm.
Uh, um, but there's another case. It's another Environmental Protection Act case, and probably this week, the last week of June, or they may go into the next week because they still have about 13 decisions left. The Supreme Court is expected. They agreed to hear a case that had to do with fishermen and the regulation of them. And the question that's before them is a head-on question of whether the Chevron doctrine is still good law. The expectation, I think, from listening to the oral arguments and from the pundits and people much smarter than me, is that this court is likely to maybe full bore address it. Although interesting things happen in recent terms, Cassandra, and especially this term. There's been some discussion about how Justice Amy Coney Barrett, who's one of the newest justices on the court, how she is kind of maybe pushing back a little bit on the full history and tradition type of approach. She had a concurrence, I think, last week where she outlined some of that in the case that came down late last week, Rahimi, which had to do with domestic violence and Second Amendment. She was in the majority. It was an 8-1 decision, only Justice Thomas dissented. But like you said, I think for your listeners, I think the stay tuned for the Chevron case. But all you have to do is Google Chevron later this week or next week when the decision comes down, and you'll see what the decision is. The one thing I always caution people is when the decisions come out, when they come from the bench. If you remember the Affordable Care Act several years ago, on the front steps of the courthouse, they said, well, the Affordable Care Act is overturned because what happened in that case was Chief Justice John Roberts said that the Commerce Clause was not viable, right? But then you had to turn the page and it said, but hey, the taxing power is okay. And
you got to read it.
But this one's got a lot of attention, and it'll change the way that things happen. And as you and I talked about, the challenge will be if, in fact, they full on say, Chevron doctrine is no longer the law of the land, how this Congress and how the agencies will function going forward. My expectation will be if they fully head on say Chevron is no longer a good law, that what we'll see is a lot more challenges. We'll see challenges to various agencies, whether it's the SEC, the EPA. We'll see a series of challenges in future terms. But there will be some discussion about, once again, are they using discretion? Do they have to change things? And if so, how do they function?
Yeah, listen, that's part of Congress's job, right, is to legislate. So maybe it's just as simple as getting them to put some real detail around things and give these agencies a bright line, right? Because it does seem like they've expanded. This regulatory creep has happened, right? In so many of the like you mentioned, the EPA, the CFTC, the SEC for sure. So actually going into that topic, we could talk about the SEC and their blockchain and crypto, attempt to land grab, if you will. My thought on it really is that it's not in their purview, but it really is more of a different agency that should be involved there. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, although if there's a different agency involved, then is that more creation of an administrative state? So that's kind of the rub, right?
In my mind, you're talking ultimately about currency, right? At least in the case of Bitcoin. So what's the regulator that already oversees currencies and currency trading? It's not the SEC.
Yeah.
Right? It's, I believe, I want to say CFTC.
That might be the case. Yeah. You can do that. Again, I think that those are some of the questions I think that will come out of, again, this kind of what's been designed. And again, one of the things that, I think in the bump stock case that came out last week, again, I think Alito's concurrence talked about the fact that, Congress could, in fact, fix these things and make it, one of the things I think that we talk about is, for example, in the Constitution, there's the creation of the Postal Service. There's the creation of the Patent Office, and again, so with very little guidelines, right? In there, and in fact, it's interesting that this court, the Supreme Court, which has been delegated authority by whom? By Congress, right? And Congress, by judicial acts, has set really the tone, because if you look at Article 3 of the Constitution, it's the shortest of the three articles for the three branches of government, right? And it just says Congress shall create a Supreme Court and such inferior courts as it deems appropriate, and have at it, And here's a couple other things, and most of Article 3 talks about treason and other things. So it's an interesting, it's interesting. And again, like I said, Congress is tasked with these things. Again, we'll see if they're up for the task. I'm not sure if they were up for the task in 1984. The final thing I'll say about Chevron is interesting because back in 1984, when this was created by the Supreme Court, Justice Stevens wrote the majority opinion and tried to make some bright line rules. The reality is that the conservatives, Justice Scalia, for example, before he got on the Supreme Court, he loved him some Chevron. Why? Because it was the Ronald Reagan administration, and if you look at Ronald Reagan and that administration, if you look at the register of regulations, it grew 6 or 7-fold in the 8 years of Ronald Reagan. So again, the Administrative States, it's and again, I think one of the things I've talked about with my co-hosts on the podcast, we talked about otherwise, is that one of the things that will be interesting is depending on who's in the White House, which administrative agencies they are okay with having discretion or not, right? It kind of, it's a pendulum, right? It's and the Biden administration, the FTC is very active, the Federal Trade Commission, the some other agencies, the SEC, like we're talking about. So who knows?
Yeah. Well, I think I think most people just aren't aware of how much of our civil liberties we've succumbed to the regulatory government, because it's kind of quietly, slowly, we don't realize that really that's what governs us pretty much most of our day. It's not really the stuff coming out of Congress at this point, right? I mean, speed limits and having to have car insurance and, that's all regulatory government, right?
It is.
Yeah. So, one more thing. So I did want to talk about, because I know you do quite a bit in the insurance area as well. And, I think some people feel like insurance is a necessary evil, right? I mean, we hope we never use it, but I mean, in your mind, what should the average person really know about what kind of insurance coverage you consider from a risk management for someone's life, right? What they should really have.
Yeah, I mean, if at minimum, like we talked about, car insurance, homeowners or rental insurance, but you need to be, one of the things we talk about is you need to fully understand the policies and what they provide. And the best example, I think, of this is in the COVID era. A lot of business interruption for businesses, small businesses, right? People had business interruption, and the courts universally found that there was no coverage for that. So you have to read the policies, and most people don't. I think for a lifetime thing, I think depending on what kind of work you do, disability insurance is probably. And if you're employed somewhere or even an independent contractor, a lot of cases, your company will have short-term disability, maybe long-term disability, and then you can do some supplemental. Life insurance, people ask me a lot about that. I worked at a life insurance company that was mostly term. for some people, whole life, which has benefits, right? Cash value and stuff
Mhm.
has some attraction, but the flip side of that for most people is that it's very expensive for
Right.
what you get, right? And
Yeah.
if you look at, it probably takes about 10 years to get a return on that first year of premium goes down the drain, and it's much more. It may be 5 to 10 times more expensive, or whatever the ratio is. It's much more expensive than term life. You get a
Yeah.
lot more term life, and for most people, term life's going to be okay, right? As long as
Yeah.
it goes till 75, 85, or whatever
Right.
age.
What is that, Dan? What is that um, term or definition of how somebody can tell in the document what they're paying? What is the annual fee for the insurance? Because there are a
Yeah,
lot big money in insurance if you're an insurance salesperson, right?
it is.
People don't realize how much. So what is that line they should look for?
Well, they should look at the premium, and again, if they're, if you're like most people, you should look at what it costs to pay monthly versus semi-annual or annually for your insurance. There's an interest charge built into that if you're
Okay.
paying up front. If you're not paying up
Mhm.
front, um, you need to look at that premium, and the premium should include it should include all of the commissions for the insurance agents, like you said, depending on the line of insurance. Life insurance,
Mhm.
for example, the first year, these agents get a lot of the, multiples, even a bit higher than 100% of what the first year premium is. That's
Mhm.
that's all they get for it. On,
Mhm.
on car insurance and home insurance, they get a different
Every year.
commission. But
Right.
look at that front page on
Mhm.
every insurance policy. When they quote you, it should show all in what your cost is. And
Mhm.
again, one of the things that I think is, great in this day and age, Progressive did it. They no longer advertise it because I think there's a lot of engines out there. But if
Mhm.
you're looking at car insurance, if you're looking at life insurance, if you're looking at homeowners insurance, go out and do a calculator tool, because it'll show you, if you punch in some characteristics about your car or where you live, it'll give you some. Here's what Progressive charges. Here's what State Farm might charge. Here, whatever are public, because you know for the same people, depending on how they're underwriting and what the costs of that insurance company are, the rate range could be substantial for a given person.
Yeah, absolutely. People need to get sort of that independent third party calculator out so they could really see what the differences are. Absolutely. So one other thing we talked about briefly was cybersecurity and your work in the cyber area, and that seems to be getting more scary. Um, what are some things that you think people need to know about that?
The one thing I'll say is that the bad actors have gotten more and more sophisticated. And so if you get a text from your bank or from the IRS, number one, the IRS and other federal agencies aren't going to email you or send you a text, right? So one of the traps that's happening a lot nowadays, Cassandra, is that you'll get a text from, it looks like it's Chase, right? Or it
Yeah.
looks like it's Citibank. It'll say, did you authorize a transaction for $122? Please call us immediately.
Yeah.
If it's not, I mean, the fraud, we all get the fraud notices, so we know what those look like.
Hmm.
And if you've actually spent the money, that's one thing. But I would tell people, if you get an email, it looks suspicious, because again, they look like
Oh
they're from
yeah.
FedEx
Yeah.
or United States Postal
Yeah.
Service. My brother fell for it. So in Illinois, for example, the Illinois Tollway Authority has an online tool where you use the Easy Pass.
Yep.
And about a couple months ago, texts were coming out saying, "Please renew. You have to replenish $12."
Oh.
And
Oh wow.
he
He
wasn't
clicked it.
thinking. He fell
Yeah.
for it, and then he had to change his credit cards and stuff. So
Wow.
what I would tell people is that just on a regular basis, look at your accounts, whatever banking accounts or credit cards, anything you have that can be charged, to make sure that you recognize whatever's being charged if you're
Hmm.
doing online transfers or anything. And then if you don't expect something, take out your actual credit card or call your bank, the actual number.
Yeah.
Don't use the number or link
Right.
that's in the
Yep.
text. Call
Hmm.
them up and see. and maybe they'll say, yeah, this is legit. But in
Right.
many cases, they'll say, no, that's a scam. Don't fall for it. Don't hit anything else.
Yeah.
And I can tell you many stories. I serve as an arbitrator. Some of my clients that have, again, done these things where they've called, it looks like it's PayPal. It says, please call your crypto purchase or whatever. And they call and say, well, I didn't make any crypto purchase. And then the person says, well, give me your account number so I can verify, right? That all the details, and we'll take it off. And don't fall for those traps.
Don't do it. Yeah. Also, just be careful with your voice, right? I mean, even if you get a 800 number phone call and they say your name, people laugh at me. I kind of answer an unknown call with like a funny accent because they record your voice now.
They do.
And that can be used in there are all kinds of AI programs out there where they can make that one little snippet say anything in your voice they want. It's scary.
They also will ask, is this Cassandra? And if you say yes, again, they'll use that snippet. That you've authorized some crazy transaction.
Exactly.
So, My best advice is on your cell phone, if you have a landline, whatever it is, if you don't recognize the number, don't answer it. And if it's important, they'll leave a message. You can decide if you're calling back. But again, you're absolutely right. And again, with deep fakes and the AI tools are much better than they've ever been. You just have to be always alert that bad actors 24/7 are trying to find ways to make money. And they do it in small increments, but it adds up because if they get 10 people a day, give them $800, that's a lot of money.
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes crime pays, I guess, right?
I guess, yeah.
Well, Dan, I really appreciate having you on. There's been a great conversation, and I'd love to have you on again, especially after some more of these Supreme Court rulings come out. I think it would be really interesting to go over some of them.
I'd be happy to come back anytime. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, great. All right, everybody. And remember, hit that follow button or share with somebody our podcast here at Don't Buy the Bull. We would really appreciate it. Take care. Thanks so much for tuning into this episode. I really do appreciate it. Be sure to subscribe to the show, and that way you'll get updates about new episodes. Or if you really liked it, maybe you can share it to other folks you know. That I would really appreciate. So until next time, this is your reminder not to buy the bull. Ciao.